There was a time, not so long ago, and perhaps even now in countless quiet corners, when many folks held a certain belief close to their hearts. They believed, with an earnestness born of good intentions and a healthy dose of societal whisperings, that success could be weighed, measured, and meticulously counted. It was in the crisp rustle of dollar bills, the impressive numbers on a bank statement, the reassuring gleam of a new car in the driveway, or the solidity of walls that belonged solely to them. They were taught, implicitly and explicitly, that if you just worked hard enough, pushed long enough, sacrificed a bit of your peace and a lot of your waking hours, you could build a fortress of comfort and security. And within those walls, they imagined, true happiness and contentment would surely reside. So they embarked on their journeys with a fierce determination. They rose before the sun, swallowed down lukewarm coffee, and dedicated their best years to the grind. Promotions were chased with the single-minded focus of a hound on a scent. Extra shifts were embraced not as burdens, but as stepping stones to a brighter, more cushioned future. They scrimped and saved, denied themselves small pleasures, and often, quite unknowingly, set aside their truest passions, their quiet dreams, for the sake of that ever-elusive more. It was a noble pursuit in its way, fueled by a deep-seated desire to provide, to protect, to ensure their loved ones never knew the biting sting of want. They pictured a future where bills were paid without a second thought, where college funds swelled, and where the constant, nagging worry about making ends meet would finally be a distant echo. Yet, a curious thing often happened to these diligent seekers of fortune. The more they accumulated, the more they acquired, the richer their bank accounts became, the less rich their spirits sometimes felt. That quiet hum of discontent, often ignored in the rush of daily tasks, slowly began to amplify. The fortress they had built, sturdy and impressive as it might be from the outside, sometimes felt hollow within its very walls. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible ache that settled deep in their bones, a longing for something that currency couldn't buy, something that possessions couldn't fill. They had achieved what they were told was success, often far surpassing the humble beginnings from which they'd sprung, but the promised serenity, the profound sense of fulfillment, remained just out of reach, like a shimmering mirage on a distant horizon. They found themselves standing amidst their carefully constructed lives, perhaps in the warmth of their living rooms on a quiet evening, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows, and a question would bubble up from the depths of their soul. A quiet, unsettling question that refused to be silenced. Is this truly all there is? It was a moment of profound realization, a recognition that the map they had followed, the compass they had trusted, might have led them to a destination that, while outwardly impressive, left the truest parts of themselves yearning for a different kind of treasure. It was a moment when the glint of gold began to look less like a beacon, and more like a distraction from the real light they were meant to follow. Had achieved what they were told was success, often far surpassing the humble beginnings from which they'd sprung, but the promised serenity, the profound sense of fulfillment, remained just out of reach, like a shimmering mirage on a distant horizon. They found themselves standing amidst their carefully constructed lives, perhaps in the warmth of their living rooms on a quiet evening, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows, and a question would bubble up from the depths of their soul. A quiet, unsettling question that refused to be silenced. Is this truly all there is? It was a moment of profound realization, a recognition that the map they had followed, the compass they had trusted, might have led them to a destination that, while outwardly impressive, left the truest parts of themselves yearning for a different kind of treasure. It was a moment when the glint of gold began to look less like a beacon, and more like a distraction from the real light they were meant to follow. This question, spoken or not, found its way into places you de-recognize. It hummed in the quiet of a small, well-maintained house in an older working-class neighborhood, a home a little cluttered, perhaps, but certainly lived in, warm with the scent of dinner and old wood. It often settled around a man named Boyd, especially as the evening light softened, painting the garage workbench in hues of amber and long shadow. Boyd, at 48, was the kind of man you'd pass on the street and know, instinctively, that he'd earned every single one of his years. He stood about 5'10", maybe 195 pounds, with a soft midsection that spoke less of indulgence and more of the quiet settling that comes with steady, hard work and too many missed lunch breaks. His back and shoulders carried the invisible weight of a lifetime spent on a factory floor, assembling parts, tightening bolts, pushing metal through its paces. There was a quiet resilience about him, a kind of stoic endurance etched into the very lines of his face. His blue eyes, though tired, held a kind kindness, framed by the fine lines of weathered skin. A small, almost imperceptible scar rested above his left eyebrow, a forgotten story from a younger, perhaps clumsier Boyd. His square jaw was clean-shaven, and his brown hair, now threaded with about 30% gray, receded slightly at the temples and thinned a bit at the crown. It was usually combed neatly enough, but by the end of a shift, it often had a life of its own, a bit messy, just like the world. But it was his hands that truly told his story. Thick, calloused palms, knuckles perpetually scraped from some unseen encounter with steel or brick, the fingernails trimmed short and permanently ingrained with the dark memory of grease and dirt. These were hands that worked, that provided, that built. They were the tools of his trade, and in their rough texture you could read chapters of dedication. Boyd was a man of few words, especially on the surface. He observed more than he spoke, often with a slight hesitation before he did, his plain language carrying a thoughtfulness that belied its simplicity. He was reliable, unflappable, the kind of man who'd show up rain or shine and just get the job done. Sometimes a dry bit of humor would escape him, a quiet quip that made you smile, but mostly he was just there, present. He drove an older model Ford F-150, a reliable beast with high mileage and a few dents that were testament to its years of service. It was always kept clean, a testament to Boyd's respect for the things that served him and his family. And that family, Sarah, his wife of 47 years, Emily, his 19-year-old daughter, and Mark, his 15-year-old son, was the gravitational center of his universe. Boyd's life revolved around them, around providing. Money was always tight, never enough for real luxuries, but they made ends meet. There was no cushion, no safety net for the unexpected, and that fear of instability gnawed at him, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of his quiet demeanor. He believed deep in his bones that success was simply about making enough money to keep his family comfortable, to ensure his kids had an easier road than he did. It was a noble pursuit, he thought, one that justified the extra shifts, the overlooked promotions he'd chased, even the sacrificing of his own passions and well-being. He worked, and he worked harder. He'd take on any overtime, always feeling like he needed just a little more, always just out of reach of that elusive enough. But despite the steady paychecks, despite the bills being paid, there was a gnawing emptiness inside him, a yearning for something more fulfilling than just getting by. He was providing, yes, but at what cost to his own spirit? He was a practical problem solver, resilient to the core, but he was also hesitant to voice his own needs, his own quiet dreams, prone to bottling up the emotions that stirred beneath his stoic facade. He'd become a little cynical about change, about grand ideas, because he'd seen too many of them come and go without ever truly changing the grind of his days. The warm evening light often found him sitting in his worn armchair, the house humming with the life of his family, and he'd feel it, that quiet, unsettling question. Was this truly all there was? He had provided. He had sacrificed. Why then did he feel so empty? The alarm clock, a chipped plastic box with glowing red digits, shrieked its protest at 4:30 a.m. Boyd's eyes, heavy with sleep, fluttered open. A deep sigh rumbled in his chest, a sound he was so used to he barely noticed it anymore. His average build, a little softer around the midsection these days, creaked as he swung his legs out of bed, the familiar ache in his lower back a constant companion. The faint light from the moon outside filtered through the window, painting the room in the muted grays and blues that seemed to cling to the early hours of his working days. He moved through the small house, a well-maintained but lived-in space in an older working-class neighborhood, with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd done the same routine for decades. The bathroom mirror reflected a face that told a story of hard work. Square jaw, tired but kind blue eyes, weathered skin with fine lines around the corners, a small scar above his left eyebrow. His brown hair, now with a good 30% gray and thinning slightly at the crown, was neatly combed back, though it would be messy again by noon. He shaved quickly, the rasp of the blade a familiar sound in the quiet house. His thick, calloused palms, knuckles often scraped, moved with purpose as he got dressed in his worn but clean work clothes. His fingernails, trimmed short, still held the ingrained ghost of grease and dirt, a permanent badge of his trade. Sarah, his wife of 25 years, was still asleep, a gentle hump under the blankets. He left a note by the coffee maker, a small, quiet gesture of love that needed no words. He brewed himself a strong, black cup, the aroma filling the kitchen with a fleeting warmth that would soon be replaced by the chill of the morning drive. He ate a piece of toast standing at the counter, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. Emily, his 19-year-old, and Mark, 15, were still lost in their teenage slumbers. He felt a pang of something: pride, worry, a deep desire for them to have an easier life than his as he imagined their futures. He always told himself he was doing this for them. Out in the driveway, his reliable, older model Ford F-150, kept clean despite its few dents and high mileage, waited like an old friend. The engine turned over with a familiar groan, and Boyd pulled out into the quiet street, the headlights cutting a path through the pre-dawn gloom. The commute was always the same: a stretch of dimly lit residential roads, then the merging onto the highway, where he joined a silent procession of other early risers heading towards the city's industrial heart. His mind would wander, never far from the numbers. The mortgage, Emily's college tuition that always seemed to stretch their budget to the breaking point, Mark's new baseball cleats, the ever-present shadow of a car repair or a medical bill that could derail everything. Money was okay, but always tight. They made ends meet, but there was no real cushion, no comfortable margin. Just enough, always with the fear of asterisk not enough lurking close by. The factory floor was a cacophony of banging metal, whirring machinery, and the distant shouts of foremen. Boyd, with his quiet, stoic demeanor, slipped into his role seamlessly. He was a good worker, reliable, practical. He could fix nearly anything, troubleshoot a failing line with a glance. But the work itself, repetitive and physically demanding, offered little challenge to his mind. He'd spent years assembling the same components, watching the same parts slide down the conveyor belt. His strength was in his unwavering dedication, his resilient spirit, but the spirit itself felt worn down, like a dull tool. A faulty pneumatic press, a constant annoyance, jammed again that morning. He patiently cleared it, the grease seeping into his calloused hands, the small frustration barely registering on his face, though a muscle in his square jaw twitched. He exchanged a few grunted words with a coworker, a bit of dry humor about the company's ancient equipment, then returned to the relentless rhythm of the line. The hours crawled by, marked by the piercing shriek of the shift whistle, the brief respite of lunch, a cold sandwich, and a thermos of coffee eaten in the break room, his thoughts still on the bills and then back to the grind. By the time the final whistle blew, the day had drained him. His shoulders ached, his blue eyes felt gritty, and his usually neat hair was certainly messy now. The drive home was slower, traffic thicker, but the thought of Sarah and the kids, of a warm meal and the familiar clutter of his own living room pulled him forward. He pulled the F-150 into the driveway, the evening light warm and tired, casting long shadows. He'd done it again, provided, endured. But as he pushed open his front door, the hum of his family's life filling his ears, that quiet, unsettling question returned. He was providing, yes, but at what cost? He looked at his thick, grease-stained hands, the tools of his provision, and wondered if they were building anything more than just a living. The yearning for something more fulfilling, for something beyond just getting by, echoed in the quiet corners of his mind, a silent desperation he rarely allowed himself to voice. The front door closed with a soft click, muting the street noise but not the clamor in his head. "Hey, Dad," Mark called from the kitchen, a mix of soda and teenage energy. "Dinner in 15? Boyd nodded, though Mark couldn't see him. He took a moment leaning against the doorframe, letting the day's weight settle before he shed it. Or tried to. He could hear Sarah's gentle hum, the clatter of pots and pans, the easy rhythm of their home. It was a good sound, a safe. The front door closed with a soft click, muting the street noise but not the clamor in his head. "Hey, Dad," Mark called from the kitchen, a mix of soda and teenage energy. "Dinner in 15? Boyd nodded, though Mark couldn't see him. He took a moment leaning against the doorframe, letting the day's weight settle before he shed it. Or tried to. Sound, the kind he worked himself raw for every single day. He pushed off the frame, moving towards the kitchen, the smell of Sarah's pot roast already warming the air. At the table, Mark was already halfway through his glass of milk, a trail of it on his upper lip. Emily, usually quick to join the banter, sat quietly, pushing a fork through her mashed potatoes. Her brow was furrowed, a slight frown etched between her kind blue eyes so like her mother's, and sometimes he thought like his own, too. But tonight there was a cloud in them he hadn't seen before, a subtle worry that made his own stomach tighten. "Rough day, Em?" Sarah asked, her voice soft, noticing the same quiet. She reached across the table to touch Emily's hand. Emily shrugged, a small, weary motion that made her shoulders slump. "Just college stuff. She picked at a piece of roast, not meeting anyone's gaze. Her plate remained mostly untouched, a stark contrast to Mark's rapid consumption. Boyd watched her, a knot tightening in his chest. He'd always pushed her gently towards a degree, towards a safe job, accountant maybe, something stable, something that wouldn't have her coming home with grease under her fingernails and the ache of standing on concrete floors all day. He wanted her to have a life with options, with less worry than he'd known. He wanted her to be successful. And in his mind, that meant financially secure, cushioned against the unpredictable blows life could deliver. "What kind of stuff?" he asked, his voice slower than usual, a subtle tremor in the usually steady rhythm. His calloused fingers gripped his fork a little tighter, a familiar comfort he suddenly found no solace in. Emily sighed, a sound that seemed too heavy for her young shoulders, and finally looked up, her blue eyes, so much like his own, clouded with a weariness that twisted something inside him. I don't know what I'm doing, Dad. Everyone says accounting is good, stable, you know. Good money, but I hate it. I really hate the thought of it." She pushed the plate away, a gesture that spoke volumes. "I just feel like I have to pick something safe, something that makes sure, well, that we're all safe, that I won't struggle like." Her voice trailed off, but her gaze met his, and in that unspoken moment he knew she meant "like you." The words hung in the air, heavy and thick as factory smoke. Boyd felt a cold tremor work its way down his spine. He poured his entire life into making sure they wouldn't struggle. Every extra shift, every promotion he'd clawed his way to, every ache in his back, every drop of sweat had been for them. For a house, for food on the table, for college tuition. For safety. He'd truly believed, that was success. That was love. He'd given them comfort, a roof over their heads, a full belly, a life without the gnawing anxiety he'd known growing up. But looking at Emily's face, at the dull resignation in her eyes, he saw not safety, but a reflection of his own weariness. He saw the very future he'd tried to spare her from, only in a different form. Sarah, sensing the shift in the room, gently nudged Emily's arm. "Honey, it's okay not to know everything right now. We can talk about it." But Boyd couldn't let it go, not this time. Her unspoken accusation, gentle though it was, hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't just providing for them, he was unwittingly setting the wrong example. He'd shown her how to chase stability, how to sacrifice self for perceived security, but he hadn't shown her how to live. He hadn't shown her joy. His own passions, once vibrant, had been slowly eroded, replaced by the relentless drumbeat of obligation. His old woodworking tools, gathering dust in the garage, felt like a silent reproach. That night, sleep wouldn't come. The small, well-maintained house was quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the refrigerator. Boyd lay beside Sarah, listening to her soft, even breathing, but his own mind was a whirlwind of shame and revelation. He finally slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her, and padded to the living room. The streetlights cast long, pale shadows through the window, painting the familiar room in a stark, unfamiliar light. He sank onto the worn armchair, his thick, calloused hands resting on his knees. 3 a.m, the hour of unvarnished truth. What had his life become? A long, slow grind. A treadmill he couldn't seem to step off. He looked at his hands in the dim light, permanently ingrained with the history of his labor. They were strong, capable hands, but what had they built for him lately? What had they created for his soul? He'd always prided himself on being a practical man, a problem solver. But he suddenly felt like he'd been solving the wrong problems, or at least solving them with the wrong tools. He'd always told himself he was doing it for them. For Sarah, for Emily, for Mark. And he was, every fiber of his being was dedicated to his family. But in chasing that elusive enough, that financial cushion he always felt just out of reach, he'd forgotten to live. He'd neglected the quiet hum of contentment that used to come from carving a piece of wood, from fixing an old engine, from simply sitting and watching the sunset with Sarah. He'd traded presents for possessions, or at least the pursuit of possessions. His biggest fear, the one he never spoke aloud, was that he would look back one day and realize he'd missed it all. That he'd spent his life looking forward to a secure future that never quite arrived, only to find the present had slipped through his fingers, unlived. He saw that fear reflected in Emily's eyes, the dread of a life lived without meaning, without joy, purely out of obligation. He taught her that lesson implicitly by his own example. He'd shown her that being tired was a badge of honor, that quiet endurance was the highest virtue. But at what cost? A deep, unfamiliar ache settled in his chest, not a physical pain, but a hollowness he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge in years. He thought of his quiet resilience, his ability to bottle up emotions. That wasn't a strength tonight. It was a prison. He yearned for something more fulfilling, a life where his hands built not just a paycheck, but something tangible, something that truly mattered, that enriched not just his bank account, but his spirit and the lives of those he loved. He wanted to show Emily, truly show her, that there was more to success than just avoiding struggle. There had to be. He had to believe there was. He had to find it. Not just for her, but for himself. The quiet of the house pressed in around Boyd after Emily retreated to her room. He sat at the kitchen table, his coffee long cold, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. In the dark window, his reflection stared back. A tired man with lines etched around kind blue eyes, thinning hair, and the soft midsection that had settled in over years of long factory shifts. His calloused hands, thick with the grime that never quite washed out, lay still on the worn formica. These hands had built a life, sure, piece by precise piece, always striving for more. More shifts, more overtime, more security. He'd measured success by the absence of debt, by the hum of the furnace, by shoes on his kids' feet. For a long time, that had been enough. But tonight, Emily's words had shattered that old definition. He saw his own quiet resignation reflected in her youthful confusion, the dread of a life lived purely out of obligation. His endless pursuit of more income meant to protect, had instead become a comfortable cage, leaving him tired and empty, modeling the very kind of life he never wanted for his daughter. He hadn't just sacrificed his own passions, he'd implicitly asked his kids to do the same, to play it safe. He pushed back from the table, the chair scraping on the linoleum. He walked into the living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows. He ran a thick, scarred thumb over a dusty book he'd always meant to read. Always meant to? That phrase echoed, a testament to deferred dreams. He stood there in the reflective quiet, the weight of his own unspoken desires pressing down. The factory whistle would blow again tomorrow, calling him back to the grind. But something inside him had shifted. A silent, unyielding declaration bloomed in his chest. Enough. Not enough money, not enough comfort, but simply enough of this particular way of living, this silent sacrifice, this quiet resignation. He didn't have a plan. He didn't know what asterisk to change, only that something had to. He couldn't keep going down this road, not if it meant losing himself and the chance to truly guide his children to a life rich in more than just dollars. He had to show them. He had to asterisk it. The weight of that choice, unspoken and unshared, was immense. The first rays of dawn, a weak, pale blue, barely kissed the windows the next morning when the alarm clock buzzed its familiar, insistent tune. For years, Boyd's hand had reached out automatically, silencing it, his body already anticipating the rhythm of the day. Coffee, toast, then the rumbling journey to the factory floor. Today, though, his hand paused. That word, *enough*, still hummed beneath his ribs. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment longer than usual, his sturdy frame a silhouette against the dim light. Sarah stirred beside him, murmuring softly in her sleep. He didn't want to disturb her, not with these thoughts that were still too new, too unformed to share. The weight of financial responsibility still felt like a physical anchor pulling at him. What are you even doing, Boyd? This isn't going to pay the bills. The old doubts, like stubborn rust, tried to seep back in. He could almost hear the clang of machinery, feel the grease on his hands before he even left the house. But then he remembered Emily's lost eyes, her quiet confession of feeling directionless. He remembered his own reflection in that mirror, tired, yes, but more than that, just going through the motions. A life of mere provision, he now understood, wasn't truly providing a life. It was just keeping the lights on. He had to show them something more than just survival. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up. The usual morning routine beckoned, a well-worn path through the quiet house. Instead of heading straight for the coffee maker, he made a slight detour, his calloused feet padding across the cool linoleum. He walked past the kitchen, past the living room, and paused at the door to the garage. It was a space usually reserved for his truck, for repairs, for storage of things that accumulated over the years. But there, in the far corner, under a thick sheet of dust, lay his old workbench. A deep breath filled his lungs, tasting faintly of old oil and ambition. This was it. Day one. The dust seemed to mock him, a testament to years of neglect. He could have easily just turned away, retreated to the comfort of routine, convinced himself it was foolish, that he didn't have the time. The pull of habit was strong, like a strong current trying to drag him back to shore. Another shift, Boyd. That's what you need, not some dusty hobby. He felt the familiar ache in his lower back, the stiffness in his shoulders, a reminder of every single repetitive motion he'd made in the factory. It would be so much easier to just pour that coffee, eat his toast, and head out. But the image of Emily's face, etched with that quiet confusion, spurred him on. With a grunt, he reached for the dust-laden tarp, throwing it back with more force than necessary. The old tools lay beneath, silent witnesses to a forgotten passion. Chisels, planes, various clamps, all caked in grime, some with a faint film of rust. He picked up a worn block plane, turning it over in his hands. The weight felt good, familiar. His thick fingers, permanently etched with the telltale lines of manual labor and often bearing the grime of the factory, traced the smooth, cool wood of its handle. "Well now," he muttered to himself, his voice a low rumble in the quiet garage. "Looks like you and me got some catching up to do." He started by clearing a small section of the bench, pushing aside old paint cans and forgotten bolts. The effort was physical, yes, but it was also a struggle against the inertia of years. His body wanted to resist, to fall back into the well-worn grooves of expectation. But his mind, nudged by that quiet resolve, pressed forward. He found an old rag and started wiping down the plane, the dark, rich wood slowly emerging from beneath the dust. It wasn't about the woodworking itself, not yet. It was about the act of choosing, of beginning. This small, almost insignificant rebellion against the relentless pull of more felt like a mountain he was slowly, stubbornly starting to climb. And with each wipe, each breath, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift settled within him, like bedrock finding its new, firm place. He wiped the dust from the plane, the cool metal a familiar weight in his calloused hand. The rich grain of the wood handle, once obscured, now gleamed faintly under the soft garage light. It was a small victory, this act of reclamation, but it was just the first step on a path that felt as overgrown as an old country road. Day 3, the first few days, there was a quiet novelty to it. He'd spend a little time each evening after dinner, just puttering, cleaning tools, running his fingers over chunks of. He wiped the dust from the plane, the cool metal a familiar weight in his calloused hand. The rich grain of the wood handle, once obscured, now gleamed faintly under the soft garage light. The walnut, a rich, dark promise, lay clamped on his bench, awaiting its transformation. There was a time not so long ago when this bench was just another surface for odds and ends, a place to stack spare parts or a forgotten paint can. The tools, gifts from a younger, more hopeful Boyd, had collected dust like tiny headstones of forgotten dreams. He told himself there wasn't time. Not with the overtime, not with the bills, not with the constant gnawing feeling that they were always just one step behind. Success, he'd believed, was measured in the extra hours, in the promotions he'd chased that never quite brought the relief he expected. It was a chase that left him perpetually tired, an ache behind his eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. He'd provided, yes, but often felt like he'd done so from a distance, watching his family live while he just worked. Now, though, the shavings curled from the plane's blade, fragrant and delicate, piling like tiny scrolls on the grimy floor. Each pass was a meditation, a deliberate act of creation. It wasn't about making money from this piece of wood, though he might sell it someday. It was about the feel of the grain, the smell of the wood, the quiet satisfaction of shaping something with his own hands. This quiet corner of his garage, once a place of neglected potential, had become a refuge, a workshop not just for wood, but for his own spirit. He heard the familiar rumble of Mark's bike pulling into the driveway, followed by the clatter of a bat being dropped. Before, Boyd might have just grunted a greeting from the doorway, his mind still on the next shift, the next bill. But today he set the plane down carefully, brushed the sawdust from his worn jeans. "Rough practice, champ?" Boyd asked, leaning against the doorframe as Mark came in, sweaty and bright-eyed, tossing his glove onto a stack of old tires. Mark shrugged, already reaching for a water bottle. "Coach said I gotta work on my swing," said I'm too tentative at the plate. Boyd nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "He's right, seen it myself. You got the power, son, you just gotta trust it." He paused, picking up a stray baseball from the bench and tossing it gently in his hand. "Tell you what, tomorrow after school, we'll hit the park, just you and me. We'll work on that swing." No pressure, just good, solid contact. Mark's eyes widened slightly. "Really? You got time?" He sounded surprised, a hint of his old, unspoken disappointment in his voice. "Got all the time in the world for that," Boyd said, the words feeling true, settling comfortably in his chest. In the past, he'd always been too busy, too tired. The extra shift had always called louder than the crack of a bat in the late afternoon sun. But what had that extra shift really bought him, beyond a temporary reprieve from worry? He'd seen the flicker of something in Mark's eyes, a yearning for his father's presence that money couldn't buy. Later that evening, after dinner, he found Emily hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, a textbook splayed open next to it. Her brow was furrowed, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if unsure where to start. He remembered their conversation weeks ago, the one that had felt like a punch to the gut, the one where she'd admitted her fear of pursuing what she loved. He remembered his own dismissive advice, his push for practicality born from his own anxieties. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the aroma mingling with the faint smell of Sarah's pot roast. He sat down opposite Emily, not saying anything, just stirring his coffee slowly. It's just not clicking, Dad," Emily finally mumbled, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Marketing strategies, it's so dry, and I keep thinking about that art history elective I took, the one with the Renaissance stuff. I actually liked that." Boyd took a sip of his coffee. "Yeah, Renaissance, huh? All those old painters carving out beauty from nothing. Pretty impressive." He paused, looking directly at her, his blue eyes tired but kind. "You know, Emily, I spent a lot of years chasing what I thought was safe, what I thought was smart, and it got us by, sure. But there's a difference between getting by and actually living, between putting food on the table and putting asterisk joy on the table, if that makes sense." Emily looked up, her expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. She'd never heard her father talk like this before, not really. "That art history, if that makes your brain hum, if that makes you feel alive," Boyd continued, his voice soft but firm, "then maybe that's not just an elective. Maybe that's a path. You gotta build a life, darling, not just an income statement. The income will come one way or another if you're building something you believe in." He leaned back, a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Don't let my mistakes be yours. Your mom and I will figure out the rest." A quiet hum of understanding seemed to pass between them. Emily's shoulders relaxed a fraction, and she actually picked up her art history textbook, flipping through its colorful pages with a renewed interest. It wasn't a sudden fix, but it was a seed planted, a permission given that he'd never allowed himself. Later, as the house quieted, Boyd found Sarah in the living room, sketching designs for a quilt she was making. He sank onto the old armchair, the springs groaning faintly in protest. The TV hummed in the background, a nature documentary about migrating birds. Sarah looked up, her eyes soft. "Long day, honey?" He nodded, stretching his arms over his head. "Good day. Mark and I are hitting the park tomorrow." Emily's got her head in her art books again. He paused, looking around their lived-in, slightly cluttered home. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, full of stories. "You've been different lately, Boyd," Sarah said, not as a question, but as an observation, a quiet acknowledgement. "Happier somehow, less stretched." He reached out, taking her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Emily, she got me thinking about what I've been chasing all these years, and what I've been missing." He squeezed her hand gently. "I spent years thinking if I just earned enough, we'd be set, but all that chasing just left me tired and empty. Turns out real rich ain't about what's in your bank account, it's about what you give and who you share it with. When I stopped chasing dollars and started building good things, good connections, that's when life actually felt full." He looked at her, his tired blue eyes holding a quiet, profound contentment. He wasn't suddenly a wealthy man, not in the way he used to define it. The soft midsection was still there, the finances still needed careful watching. But the gnawing emptiness was gone, replaced by a deep, sturdy quiet that felt more like success than any promotion ever had. He was still Boyd, the factory worker, the man of few words, but he was also Boyd, the coach, the craftsman, the father, the husband, finally building a life that truly hummed. The old Ford F-150, still reliable despite its mileage and a few new dents, idled in the driveway as Boyd helped Mark pull his baseball bag from the bed. The late afternoon sun, a warm, buttery light, stretched long shadows across their small, well-maintained lawn. Mark, still flushed from practice, bounced a little as he walked, chattering about a tricky catch. Boyd, listening more with his eyes than his ears, nodded occasionally, a faint smile playing on his lips. Coaching Mark's team had become more than just a duty. It was a way to spend time, to teach more than just batting stances. It was about seeing the boys try, fail, and get back up, about building something together, even if it was just a shaky pyramid of camaraderie on a dusty field. Later, as the evening light softened to a rich amber and filtered through the small window of his garage, Boyd was at his workbench. The scent of sawdust and fresh pine mingled with the faint, ingrained smell of engine grease. His thick, calloused hands, the knuckles often scraped, moved with a quiet precision over a piece of oak. He wasn't building anything grand, just a simple birdhouse for Mrs. Henderson next door, whose old one had finally given up the ghost in the last storm. His brown hair, now with a good 30% gray, was slightly messy as he leaned in, his tired blue eyes focused. a tiny scar above his left eyebrow catching the light. There was a rhythm to the work, a quiet satisfaction in shaping something useful, something durable. This was a different kind of provision, a different kind of building. One evening, Emily came home from the college library, her shoulders slumped, a familiar worry etched on her young face. She sank onto the couch, tossing her backpack beside her with a sigh. Boyd, sitting across from her, slowly lowered the newspaper he hadn't been truly reading. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice slow and thoughtful. She picked at a loose thread on the cushion. "Just all this studying. And sometimes I just don't see the point. It feels like I'm just jumping through hoops to get to another hoop. Everyone talks about career prospects, but what if those aren't prospects I even want?" Her voice was small. Boyd put the newspaper down completely, his gaze gentle but unwavering. He remembered that feeling, the constant push for more, the emptiness that followed. He leaned forward slightly. "You know, Em," he began, a slight hesitation in his words. "I spent years thinking if I just earned enough, we'd be set. Believed success was all about the numbers. But all that chasing just left me tired and empty." He paused, letting his words hang in the quiet living room. "Turns out, real rich ain't about what's in your bank account. It's about what you give and who you share it with. When I stopped chasing dollars and started building good things, good connections, that's when life actually felt full." He picked up a small, smoothly sanded wooden bird he'd carved earlier, turning it over in his hand. "Sometimes," he said, looking at her, his eyes kind, "you gotta figure out what makes your own heart hum, not just what makes the most noise in other folks' ears. What you build, what you share, that's the real legacy." He offered her the wooden bird. Emily took it, her fingers tracing its smooth contours, a thoughtful, hopeful expression beginning to soften her features. The soft glow of the lamp in the living room